A federal judge, you see, tried to silence her with a $20,000 fine. But Representative Jasmine Crockett, she came armed with the law, and the whole country watched him crumble. The hearing room inside the federal courthouse in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was quiet, too quiet, actually, for what everyone knew was coming. Representative Crockett, sitting tall in a navy blue suit, didn't even blink as her name was called. She adjusted her microphone, looked toward the row of committee members, and began. "I'll be direct," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I was elected to speak, not to sit silent when people in power abuse their position." A few murmurs stirred, mostly from aides and staff seated in the back. Cameras were already rolling. This ethics hearing had been plastered all over the news for days. Tensions between the House Oversight Subcommittee and Crockett had been simmering for months, but no one, absolutely no one, expected what happened next. Barely 6 minutes into her opening statement, she had just referenced a previous vote where her colleagues' campaign donors directly benefited from a defense contract. No names yet, just the facts. That's when Judge Stanley Breyer, the committee's presiding officer, leaned forward and cut her off. "You're dangerously close to contempt, Representative Crockett," he said, his voice sharp, almost amused. "Stay in line, or I'll see to it you're fined accordingly." Jasmine arched an eyebrow. "You're threatening me with a fine for what, exactly?" Answering a question under oath. "You've been warned," he said. $20,000. Contempt of this committee. Final notice. The room went dead still. A low gasp from someone near the side wall was quickly swallowed by the heavy silence. One of Jasmine's aides, Troy Delmar, a quiet man with thick glasses and a habit of biting his lower lip when nervous, stood up slightly, unsure if he should intervene. But Jasmine raised her hand slightly without looking at him. "I'd like that on the record, Mr. Breyer," she said calmly, "that you just threatened to fine an elected official for speaking the truth." "You're grandstanding," he fired back. "This isn't your campaign trail." That's when Jasmine reached into the slim blue folder beside her. Her hands didn't shake, she didn't even glance at the committee members now glaring at her, one by one. She pulled out 3 stapled packets of paper and placed them in front of her. "I came prepared," she said, and then she began to read. She cited U.S. v. Middleton, 1983, explaining that committee hearings do not possess punitive authority over sitting members outside procedural violations, none of which had occurred that day. Judge Breyer's face twitched, barely, but enough for the cameras to catch. Furthermore, she continued, flipping a page, she presented an internal memo dated October 12, 2023, instructing the committee to refrain from imposing fines beyond advisory recommendations. "That document," she said, lifting it briefly before placing it down again, "came from your office, Judge Breyer. Your initials are on the 3rd page." The silence turned heavy. Representative Charlene Mendez, seated 2 chairs down from Breyer, leaned forward slightly, whispering something to her colleague, Anthony Rule. Breyer stared at Jasmine but didn't speak. She kept going. "I have a sworn responsibility to speak truthfully, not carefully, not fearfully, and certainly not quietly when corruption is being shielded by procedural threats." Then she closed the folder. No theatrics, no raised voice, just clarity. "I won't be silenced, not today." It wasn't just powerful, it was surgical. It landed like a brick on polished wood. People watching the live feed online began clipping the moment. You could almost hear the first wave of uploads happening in real time. The hashtags hadn't started yet, but they were coming. But this wasn't the end, this was just the beginning. Your like and comment tell the algorithm these stories deserve to be heard. Thanks for your support. The night before the hearing, Jasmine sat in a modest hotel suite just a block away from the courthouse. The place wasn't lavish, plain tan walls, a worn desk, and a flickering floor lamp that made the room feel smaller than it was. But none of that mattered, her attention was locked on the stack of documents spread across the table like puzzle pieces. Her aide, Troy Delmar, had just returned with lukewarm black coffee and 2 granola bars. "This is it," he said, sliding the cup beside her. That memo from Breyer's office, buried in the supplemental files. No one expected us to dig that far back. Jasmine looked up, her eyes were tired but sharp. Did you highlight the footnote? She asked. Troy nodded. Page 3, right under the seal. His initials are faint, but they're there. She leaned back, rubbed her temple, and let out a breath. He's going to try something, she said. He won't come at me with facts, he'll come at me with power. And if he does, I'll remind him why I'm not the one who should be afraid. The tension between Breyer and Jasmine had been brewing since a hearing 2 months earlier, when she questioned the sudden dismissal of a corruption probe into a federal contractor. Breyer, sitting in that same presiding chair, had made a snide remark about representatives playing prosecutor. It had caught traction online, the clip made its rounds. Jasmine didn't comment publicly, but behind closed doors, she began preparing. Now, hours before the hearing, her plan was in motion. Back in the present, just moments after she called out Breyer in the courtroom, the judge tried to keep control. This is a hearing, not a trial, he said, trying to regain his footing. We are not here to question my record. Jasmine didn't flinch. You made your record relevant the moment you misrepresented your authority, she said, cool as glass. Let's stay on topic, Judge. Somewhere in the back of the room, a reporter scribbled furiously, another lifted his phone subtly, filming over his notepad. The committee had underestimated how quickly this hearing would turn into something much bigger. A lot of people had. The past week had been thick with whispers that someone, somewhere, wanted Jasmine silenced. It hadn't been loud or public, it was more like a hush that followed her down hallways, cancelled meetings, last-minute scheduling shifts, that subtle kind of pressure you don't see coming until it's too close to name. But Jasmine didn't need volume to hear the warning. 3 days earlier, she'd received a message from an anonymous number, no threats, just a line of text, this one's bigger than you think. She'd shown it to Troy. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at it and handed the phone back. You're still going? He asked. Jasmine laughed softly. Now more than ever. So, by the time she entered the hearing room that morning, she wasn't just ready for questions, she was ready for the blowback. Her team had spent nights researching obscure cases, internal documents, and committee procedures from as far back as the late 70s. She wasn't looking for dirt, she was looking for clarity, boundaries, rules, lines that couldn't be crossed, even by someone with a gavel. And now she had them in her hand. Those documents weren't just paper, they were armor. But Judge Breyer didn't realize that yet. He cleared his throat, forced a smile, and looked to the panel beside him. Let's move on, shall we? But no one responded. Mendez was still reading the documents Jasmine had passed along. Rule leaned toward her, asking a question too quietly to catch, even the court reporter had momentarily stopped typing. Breyer turned back to Jasmine. You may proceed, he said. The air shifted, this wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was a reckoning. But Jasmine wasn't finished, she still had cards to play. She didn't rush. Jasmine took a sip of water, placed the glass down gently, and looked across the semicircle of stone-faced committee members. If I may, she said, not asking for permission, but letting the words hang just long enough to hold the room's attention, I'd like to read one more entry into the record. Judge Breyer shifted in his seat, the cushion gave a subtle squeak that cut through the stillness. Jasmine reached for another document from her folder, this one with handwritten notes in the margins and a bright pink post-it marking the page. This is a letter, she continued, addressed to the Congressional Oversight Council, dated July 14, 2022, from General Counsel Roberta Finch. In it, she states verbatim, any attempt by an oversight chair to impose unilateral financial penalties on a sitting representative must be reviewed by an independent ethics panel. She paused. That panel, by the way, hasn't convened since last year, meaning your threat, your fine, is not just hollow, it's out of order. Breyer leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands folded like a preacher trying not to lose his cool. "This isn't a courtroom debate, Representative," he snapped. "You're trying to embarrass this committee." "No, sir," she interrupted. "I'm trying to protect its integrity." A few heads turned, not in disbelief, more like recognition. People were listening differently now, less like spectators, more like witnesses. Breyer exhaled through his nose. He turned to Mendez, then Rule, then back to the empty microphone in front of him. For a second, he looked small, not physically, but like someone whose reach no longer extended as far as he thought. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. She didn't smile, she didn't need to. And then it happened. Representative Mendez cleared her throat. "Judge Breyer, I'd like to request a 5-minute recess to review these documents." That request alone was enough to signal to the room that control had shifted. Breyer's grip on the proceedings was slipping fast. He hesitated, tried to regain his balance, but the damage was already done. 5 minutes, he muttered. The gavel struck. People stood, not in a rush, but with quiet purpose. Conversations sparked up in low tones. Jasmine stayed seated, rifling through her notes like it was just another Monday morning. Troy approached her, leaning down so only she could hear. "You got him." "We got him," she corrected. Outside the hearing room, reporters were already lining the corridor, checking their phones for updates, eyes scanning for quotes. One of them, Liam Burton, from a small paper out in Kansas, was the first to tweet, "Rupp and Jasmine Crockett flips the script mid-hearing." Judge Breyer looking cornered. Something's happening. Back inside, during recess, Mendez sat beside Rule and examined the highlighted documents again. "She did her homework," Mendez said under her breath. "Breyer's overreaching." Rule nodded slowly. "And now it's on the record." 5 minutes stretched to 7. When the committee returned, the tone had changed completely. Breyer opened with a strained voice. "Before we continue, let the record reflect that all members have reviewed the documents provided by Representative Crockett." He didn't finish the sentence because Jasmine cut in. "One more clarification before we proceed," she said. "The fine you threatened me with, was that your personal decision, or was it advised by committee counsel?" Breyer blinked, the room hushed again. "I'll repeat the question," Jasmine said. "Was that your decision, or did someone advise it?" "I." Breyer stammered, then paused. "This is not the appropriate time." "With respect, Judge," she interrupted, "if you're asserting disciplinary authority, you owe the public transparency on how that authority is derived." Someone near the back coughed, a mic clicked on somewhere down the row. And for the first time, Breyer didn't respond. He stared down at his notes, then tapped the microphone once. "This committee will take the matter under advisement." Translation: he had no answer. Jasmine sat back, her hands folded. She wasn't smug, she wasn't loud. But she had just disarmed a man who tried to bury her with protocol. But outside that room, the real storm was only beginning. The hearing wasn't over, but the narrative had already escaped the room. Within an hour, clips of Jasmine Crockett calmly dismantling Judge Breyer's threat were everywhere: Facebook, YouTube, X, TikTok. No music, no edits, just her voice, steady and direct, standing firm while a federal judge squirmed behind a desk. One clip, posted by a law student from Louisiana Tech, had over 600,000 views before lunch. She didn't even raise her voice, the caption read. "That's what power looks like." Back inside the courthouse, the hearing continued, but the energy had shifted. No more interruptions, no more jabs. The committee stuck to the script, asking safe questions and pretending like the earlier clash hadn't happened. But it had, and everyone knew it. Judge Breyer tried to keep a neutral expression, but you could see it in the way his fingers tapped nervously under the table, or how he avoided eye contact with Jasmine completely. He only addressed her when absolutely necessary, and even then, he kept his answers short. Cameras captured it all. Even more damning, a hot mic moment caught Breyer muttering something to an aide, she's a problem. The clip leaked, the internet did the rest. By the end of the day, journalists were already digging into Breyer's record. A former clerk anonymously shared that this wasn't the first time he had stretched his authority in front of an audience. Another staffer posted a photo of a whiteboard from his office with the phrase, "Control the optics," scribbled across the top. Jasmine didn't respond to any of it publicly, not yet. She walked out of the courthouse just after 3 p.m., flanked by Troy and her legal consultant, Miranda Voss, who had flown in from Dallas the night before, just in case the hearing went sideways. "We should issue a statement," Miranda said quietly as they stepped into the car. "Not yet," Jasmine replied. "Let it breathe. But people are coming for Breyer now. Let them. We don't need to push." Jasmine didn't want to make it personal, she didn't want to become the face of a courtroom drama. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was accountability, real accountability, the kind that doesn't disappear once the headlines fade. Troy looked over his shoulder from the passenger seat. "Did you mean to quote that 1983 case, or was that just what came to mind?" She smiled. "I meant every word, and I knew he wouldn't expect it." That night, news networks were split. Some ran bold headlines: "Crockett shuts down committee fine threat with historic precision, Judge Breyer's authority questioned after ethics clash." Others played it safer: "Heated exchange between committee chair and Representative Crockett sparks debate." But one thing was clear, the public was watching closely. In Louisiana, civil rights groups began organizing forums on due process and committee overreach. One organization launched a campaign with the hashtag #NotYourSilence, featuring images of Jasmine at the hearing table, documents in hand. Meanwhile, congressional staffers whispered about what might happen next. Would Breyer step down? Would he be reprimanded? The hearing hadn't resolved the original ethics complaint, it had birthed a new one. But for Jasmine, the real test was ahead. The public loved the clips, the press adored the drama. But she knew the system didn't move just because people were mad, it moved when pressure became unavoidable. So the next morning, she sent an official request to have Judge Breyer's conduct reviewed by the House Oversight Committee's Ethics Board. No fanfare, no media blast, just paperwork, the kind that moves in silence until it doesn't. But the public wasn't done talking, and neither was Jasmine. By Thursday morning, it was everywhere. The local news stations had already run it into the ground, but now it was spilling over into national segments, primetime interviews, panel discussions, legal breakdowns. Jasmine Crockett's calm refusal to fold had struck a nerve that went way beyond committee hearings and fine threats. On KPX in San Francisco, a constitutional law expert broke down the moment like it was a pivotal Supreme Court ruling. She wasn't just quoting precedent, she was asserting her right to speak truthfully under oath, he said. The judge overstepped, plain and simple. On a talk radio station in Jacksonville, a retired federal prosecutor said it differently. She didn't yell, she didn't beg. No, she brought facts. And the moment she read from that folder, you could see it, he lost control. People were talking about her in barbershops, over lunch breaks, on morning commutes. It wasn't just that she'd stood her ground, it was how she did it, without theatrics, without venom, just precise, measured language backed by paper and law. And in an age where shouting often overpowered substance, her restraint made the impact even louder. By Friday, #Crockett vs. Breyer was trending. It wasn't even a campaign, there was no ad push, no influencer wave behind it. It was just people sharing the clip, then reacting to what it meant. Teachers posted about it in civics classes. A group of high school seniors in Spokane, Washington, reenacted the hearing for a class project. A U.S. history professor in Cincinnati dedicated an entire lecture to how legislative power checks judicial abuse. But while most of the country rallied around Jasmine, not everyone was on board. A few pundits pushed back. One anchor on a conservative news network accused her of grandstanding under the guise of righteousness, another claimed her performance was rehearsed. But then something unexpected happened. Retired federal judge Maureen P. Keating, who hadn't appeared on television in years, joined a panel discussion and shut that narrative down. She did what every citizen, let alone elected official, is taught to do: respond with facts, not fear, she said. If that's performance, then our democracy depends on more of it. That clip went viral, too. Even people who weren't familiar with congressional hearings started paying attention. The story had cut through the noise because it felt different, less like politics, more like justice pushing back when the wrong person held the mic. Meanwhile, Jasmine stayed quiet. She hadn't tweeted, she hadn't posted anything on her official channels. That silence only added to the fascination. It made people lean in, wondering what she might say next, if anything. Troy and Miranda were fielding requests from every network imaginable. CNN wants an exclusive, Troy told her. Not yet. 60 Minutes. Nope. Even The Late Show called. Jasmine smiled faintly. I'm not here to go viral, I'm here to do the work. Still, the pressure kept building. An online petition calling for Breyer's removal from the committee had already passed 200,000 signatures. A law journal based in Madison, Wisconsin, published an open letter signed by 37 legal scholars questioning his authority to fine elected officials at all. In a strange twist, the story became less about Jasmine's strength and more about Breyer's intentions. Emails linked to his office began leaking, nothing criminal yet, but enough to paint a picture of a man who viewed hearings as platforms, not processes. Internal chatter showed that the idea of a public fine had been floated days before the hearing, with one aide writing, "She'll back off when it gets personal." It had gotten personal, but she didn't back off. The ethics board now had no choice but to open a formal review, not because Jasmine demanded it, but because the public was watching too closely to ignore. Troy handed her a printout from a blog that morning. "You're being called the woman who read the Constitution back to power." She smirked. "Let them talk. I'll keep reading." But what came next would test her even more, not in front of a judge, but in the court of public opinion. 2 weeks passed. The courthouse steps were quieter now, no cameras, no reporters waiting for that perfect moment when someone important trips over their own words. The frenzy had moved on, as it always does. But beneath the silence, something had shifted. Inside her office in Shreveport, Jasmine Crockett sat alone with the blinds half open, letting in a gray slant of late afternoon sun. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, calls from supporters, invitations to speak at conferences, more media requests than she could count. She hadn't accepted a single one. Instead, she was reading a handwritten letter from a woman named Eloise Dunham, a retired teacher from Topeka, Kansas. "I'm 73 years old," the letter said, "and I've never seen someone stare down a judge with that kind of calm. You didn't speak just for yourself, you spoke for every one of us who's ever been told to stay quiet. Thank you." Jasmine held the letter for a long time before folding it carefully and slipping it into the top drawer of her desk. There were over 200 letters like that, mailed, not emailed. People took the time to write in ink, on paper, their thanks. And yet, something didn't sit right, not because she doubted herself, not because she regretted the confrontation, but because she knew how easy it would be for the system to weather the outrage, let the attention die down, and carry on exactly the same. Breyer hadn't resigned, not officially. He had stepped away from his committee responsibilities pending the outcome of the ethics review, a quiet shuffle out the back door. Jasmine hadn't called for his removal, and she wasn't planning to. Her point had never been about revenge, it was about precedent. Power unchecked becomes habit, habit becomes expectation, and expectation becomes the rule. That's what she had fought against. Troy sat by the window, organizing folders for an upcoming budget session. He looked up. "You know you've changed the way people see hearings now, right? They're quoting you in civics textbooks." She gave him a look. "They're not doing that." "They are," Miranda chimed in, having seen it in a draft from some school in Oregon. Jasmine shook her head. "One moment doesn't rewrite the process." "No," Troy agreed, but it reminds people that the process isn't sacred if it's being used to silence someone. She turned in her chair and stared at the wall, plain white, covered in framed photos of her constituents, not politicians, a kid in a marching band, a nurse in scrubs, a local pastor shaking hands with a high schooler. "I just didn't want to let it slide," she said softly. "I've been in rooms like that before, rooms where you're supposed to shrink to fit the tone, where power expects your silence like it's owed to them." Troy stood and walked over. He placed a new envelope on her desk, postmarked from Montpelier, Vermont, another one from a veteran this time. Jasmine gave a tired smile. "Maybe I should start a book club." But the humor didn't mask the fatigue in her voice. She was tired, not from fighting, but from knowing there was more to fight, that there would always be another room, another hearing, another person in power expecting her to be smaller than she was. And still, she would show up. The ethics committee had launched their investigation quietly, but Jasmine knew how these things worked. They'd stall it, delay hearings, hope the public's attention drifted to something shinier. She couldn't control that, but she could keep showing up, documenting, speaking, reading the truth into rooms where lies had gotten too comfortable. Troy was at the door now. "You coming to the community meeting?" "They're waiting." Jasmine stood, grabbed her notes, and adjusted her blazer. "Let's go. Remind them why their voice matters." But before she reached the door, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message that would force her to make a choice bigger than any committee hearing. The message was short, just one sentence from Miranda: "They're offering you the keynote spot at the National Ethics Forum in D.C. Jasmine stood still for a moment. The hallway outside her office was alive with voices, neighbors, local organizers, parents from the school district, people she knew by name. They were here for the community meeting. They had questions about zoning laws, school funding, the new speed cameras on North Cross Avenue. She slipped the phone into her pocket and walked toward them. That offer could wait. The microphone at the front of the room squeaked as she adjusted it. She looked out at the group gathered in folding chairs, nothing fancy. Some folks had notebooks in their laps, others held coffee cups with both hands like it was keeping them steady. "Before we get started," she said, "I want to say something that's been sitting on me." The room hushed. "What happened in Baton Rouge, that wasn't about me winning anything. It wasn't about taking somebody down or getting a headline. It was about remembering that no one, gets to use power to shut us up." A few heads nodded. She continued. "You don't need a title to speak with authority, you don't need a microphone to tell the truth. But when you do have a platform, it's your job to protect the ones who don't." An older man in the second row leaned forward. His name was Clayton Rooks, a retired mechanic who hadn't missed a single town meeting in years. He raised a hand. "You scared that judge real good, but you didn't go low. You kept it clean." "Why?" Jasmine smiled. "Because when you fight dirty, you make it easy for them to ignore the truth. I needed them to hear it, and I needed the public to believe it. No shouting, no insults, just facts." A woman in the back, Dina Foster, single mom of 3, spoke up. "How do we do that when they keep pushing us down? When no one's listening?" Jasmine looked her in the eye. "You keep showing up, even when it feels pointless, even when the room's cold and you think no one hears you. Because silence isn't what saves us, speaking is." There was a pause, and then a small, round of claps, not thunderous, just steady, real. Later that night, back in her apartment, Jasmine stared out the window at the parking lot lights below. The offer for the keynote still sat unanswered on her phone. She didn't need the spotlight, but she understood now, more than ever, that moments like this didn't belong to her alone. They belonged to everyone watching, everyone waiting, everyone too afraid to speak until someone else cracked the silence first. So she accepted the invitation. But her message wouldn't be about what happened in Baton Rouge, it would be about something older, deeper. It would be about what it costs to tell the truth in front of people who'd rather you didn't, and why it's worth paying. In the weeks that followed, people across the country brought up her name at their own town halls. They quoted her line about protecting the ones who don't have a platform. Teachers printed it out and taped it to classroom walls, ministers used it in sermons. And slowly, what began as a power play inside a courthouse turned into a national reminder that power doesn't always win, sometimes it just needs to be reminded what the rules are, and who's still willing to speak them aloud. Hit like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments, who came out on top in this elite showdown. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or reconsider how power operates, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, talk about it, teach it. And most importantly, subscribe, because these stories matter, and more are coming.